Today, we're very fortunate to discuss with Marco Arcelli, CEO of ACWA Power. ACWA Power is a 20-year-old Saudi company. About 10% of its shares were listed in a very successful IPO in 2021, but most of the shares are unlisted, including the 44% owned by PIF, the Saudi sovereign fund. ACWA Power operates in two major industries, energy and water. On the energy front, ACWA Power develops, invests in, and operates power generation plants, generating a bit more than 50 gigawatt of power per year. Order of magnitude, Saudi Arabia's annual electricity consumption is about 85 gigawatts. ACWA Power also develops, invests in, and operates desalinated water plants, producing 7.6 million cubic meters of desalinated water every day. I believe that makes you the largest desalination company in the world. About 4,000 employees overall, key markets as of now, Saudi Arabia, Middle East and Africa, but with huge projects in many countries, including Asia and Central Europe, and we'll come back on this. The CEO, Marco Arcelli, joined ACWA Power about a year ago as CEO after dedicating most of his career to energy organizations, particularly Enel, on both the hydrocarbon side and the renewable side. Marco has also served on a number of boards and co-founded the leading provider of IoT solutions, among many other achievements. Marco, welcome and thank you for making the time to be with us today.
No, thank you for having me.
Marco, let me start with the basic and maybe slightly iconoclastic question. Energy production, fossil fuel and renewables, and water desalination. Now, both of these are growth industries, of course, very relevant to Saudi Arabia, the Middle East, and indeed the world, but they still seem to be kind of different industries. So why are these two activities inside the same companies? Are there shared capabilities or shared resources? What's the benefit of having both of these?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And actually, the technology that was used 20 years ago and up to probably 15 years ago merged the two together. So effectively, you were doing power generation, and then through that, you would create steam that you would distill, and it would be kind of, after processing, the drinking water. So the element of water desalination and power generation were together. Then about 15 years ago, actually, ACWA Power was an innovator in the industry in commercializing what was until then a niche technology, reverse osmosis.
Okay.
So what we did is we started to develop reverse osmosis water desalination that basically takes electricity supplied to make this high pressure flow through these membranes to desalinate the water. So at that point, you decoupled it. That was what enabled us to achieve impressive improvement in efficiency. To give you an example, we went from 15 kilowatt hour per cubic meter of water that we were producing to less than 3 today. Oh. We're today at 2.7. So you see the technological innovation that broke apart the power and the water was actually something that made the water so much more cheap, sustainable, green for the population that we serve.
Let me build on this, and then we can come back on the energy side. So you're the largest water desalination company in the world. How did this come about? Is it because simply there's more needs in the region, or you also mentioned big investments in technology in order to make the process more sustainable?
Two things. The first one is certainly we come from a region that is not rich in natural water.
Okay.
And so today I would say that the most advanced industry in the world in water desalination is in the Gulf, particularly Saudi Arabia. The second is ingenuity. And I think that what I mentioned to you about the specific consumption was also on the actual tariff that we can offer to the final consumer. So the tariff now went down to 36 cents of US dollar per cubic meter. That means for 1,000 liters that you produce. So the combination of these two, of course, you make it more sustainable, there's a need, but the other, you make it more affordable, and so you create additional need. Today we operate and we serve about 20 to 30% of the need of the population in 4 countries, Saudi Arabia, the Emirates, Oman, and Bahrain. And we're now developing water desalination plants in 10 countries around the world, from Morocco to Egypt, to Azerbaijan, to China, Indonesia, and so on. All the countries that basically see the success of making these resources so affordable and at the same time sustainable that they want to say, you know, that's going to be what's going to help us in the future to support our needs.
2 more questions on this. The first one is actually about the sustainability aspect. Water desalination is an energy intensive and hence carbon producing process. And also it tends to produce a side effect called brine, I believe, which tends to increase or contribute to an increase in the salt level in the water. So you've already mentioned we've innovated on the energy consumption. Tell us more how you can be at the forefront of this issue.
I would like to bring you this example of the first 100% renewable energy powered desalination plant in the world at scale, which is in Red Sea Global. Red Sea Global is a new tourist destination that Saudi Arabia and Red Sea Global Company is developing. It's going to have 85 resorts, very high scale, the size of Belgium. So it's a big development that is fully powered by renewable energy. 500 megawatt, 400 of solar panel and 100 of biofuel engines, plus all the battery storage. We also provide all the utilities, not just the power generation. So in particular, the desalination component, which is also 100% solar powered. We have also other examples like the Jazla plant in Saudi Arabia, Tawila plant in the Emirates. Those have solar panels at the plant, at the site, that supply about 25-30% of the solar needs. So we can combine basically the solar power generation with the water desalination. That makes it what we call green water solution. You mentioned the brine. So the brine is basically the effect that you have because you're extracting drinkable water, and of course, where does the salt go? There is a very fine optimization that we do so that it doesn't impact the environment significantly. So what we do is basically that for every liter of water that you bring to drinking to the population, 3 liters go back into the sea. Right. So that means that the actual increase in salinity is very much controlled and not very big. The second thing is we discharge it well in the middle of the sea with these complex models that are developed so that you can monitor the increase in salinity around the discharge. Okay. And we always measure, and it's something that is very controlled, very low, very sustainable.
Now, this is a growth industry, but it's also a capital-intensive industry. And one of the challenges is then what's the return on equity, return on investment, right? So you develop these. Did you develop these with only your own balance sheet, or are you also using other people's money, investors' money?
That's a very interesting question, and I think one of the things that sets ACWA Power apart, not only for what we do, but really how we become an enabler of the energy transition in the global south, so even beyond the Middle East. So our model is total project financing, and then we invite partners, whether financial or strategic, to co-invest with us in the equity. Okay. So effectively, we retain about 30%, 40% of the equity of the project, and we project finance that. Okay. That means that for every dollar that we invest directly, we mobilize more than $10 of other people's money. So by bringing the technologies, the best technologies that we scout around the world, bringing together also all the financing partner, whether on the debt or on the equity side, we are able to accelerate and spearhead the energy transition in countries that today suffer from the availability of affordable, clean, secure energy in Africa, in Southeast Asia, in Central Asia. That, I think, is the biggest contribution we're bringing.
And I guess having PIF as a major shareholder probably helps on this front because, of course, PIF co-invests all over the world with other big investors. And does that help a bit in terms of attracting investors?
I think that what we have with PIF is 2 things that help. So the first one is the renewable energy program in Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is going through one of the biggest decarbonization programs in the world. they have announced that they will award 20 gigawatt of renewable energy every year, 7 gigawatt of combined cycle, 2 gigawatt of battery storage for the near future. In renewables, PIF and ACWA Power were allocated the responsibility to do 70%, to deliver 70% of all these renewables. That means that every year we will build roughly 14, 15 gigawatt of capacity with PIF. The structure is we will be co-investing, the PIF company, Aramco, and ACWA Power as the lead developer. So not only we can channel investments through PIF into the projects, but also the oil and gas profits of Aramco to turn the economy into something more sustainable, more diversified from oil. So that is the first big cooperation that we have. The second is at large. So we are the national champion for renewable energy and energy transition for Saudi Arabia in the world. That means that anytime that there is a bilateral agreement or there's cooperation government to government, we are called in to provide the technical solution, the financial solution to implement the energy transition. And that made us a very strong lift in countries in Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and so on, where we are expanding.
Are the GCC countries and Saudi Arabia in particular now really serious this time about the energy transition? Because we've had this discussion before, right? There have been kind of false starts before. What I'm hearing from you is this time the commitment is very real and and really materializes in hard investments.
Yes, absolutely. So starting with Saudi Arabia, I gave you the figures, and these are not just a plan. So until today, basically, we went from being roughly 100% fossil-fired ACWA Power 6-7 years ago to today 46% of our portfolio is renewables. The same for Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia basically was 100% oil-fired until 6-7 years ago. Already today, they awarded this 7 gigawatt last year, of which we want 50% to develop. They are developing in parallel other combined cycle. And today, 23 gigawatt of capacity has already been put in operation. It's under construction, or we signed the PPA and now we're starting the construction. So the speed of the change is phenomenal to reach the target to be 50-50 renewable energy and gas-fired, efficient gas-fired generation by 2030. Some people, actually, that makes me think about another point, in Europe particularly, say, yeah, but you remember we had the discussion about taxonomy. Is gas a part of the solution or not, nuclear and so on? And I think also Europe at the end of today recognized that says, gas is part of the solution for the next 30, 40 years. When you move to the Middle East, when you operate in the global south, in Africa, Central Asia, Southeast Asia, like we do, you change completely perspective. We're used here to having growth rate of 0, 1, 2%. These countries are growing 7, 8% per year. Economy, energy. So what we need to do there is really to bring together all the energies that we can. That is why we still believe in the future for combined cycles, to elevate billions of people to the standard of living that we enjoy in the West, in the global North, and make sure that we do that in a sustainable way that looks at the minimum emission possible that you can do. So today, you don't do renewables for ideology. You do them because they're the cheapest, fastest, most secure, simpler things to do. It's not sufficient in some countries, so you complement it with all the rest.
Why did Saudi Arabia suddenly, quote unquote, see the light? It's suddenly the cost of production of renewable is becoming accessible. One of the things I read is it's also enabling them to consume less oil. And as a result, it also enables them to sell externally some of this oil. Is that a fair point?
So I think it's only part of that. Vision 2030 of His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince, is amazing. If you have not read it, I encourage you to do it. And it's really a plan to look at the future, think what the future will be like, and then take all the measures short term so that they will enable you to remain a growing competitive economy in the world. Everybody is seeing that the world is going to decarbonize. So clearly, at some point, oil demand, fossil fuel demand will decrease over time. You cannot wait until that happens before you start diversifying your economy. So, of course, part of the drive is to say, I want to support creating a different environment. And by the way, companies like ACWA Power, the private sector, who can turn Saudi Arabia to become, from what it is today, the largest exporter of oil, to become the largest exporter of low carbon expertise in the world. And we're fast becoming that. I give you another example of what's going on. It's the oil sustainability program under the Minister of Energy. And basically the idea is, how can we, rather than sell oil, transform oil into something that is valuable today to fuel this energy transition, like plastics or other uses. We're using that, for instance, to create membranes that we put on the ground at Red Sea Global, where we take all the sludge, basically all the residues from the resorts, the spent water, basically the dirty water, it settles in these basins and leaves all the nutrients, creates mangrove fields, wetlands of mangrove, hectares of these. And the residual water goes to the nursery that is feeding 30 million plants that will be used for the landscaping. So effectively, through an improved use of oil into these membranes, we're doing a full circular economy that will greenify a part of the desert in Saudi Arabia. I find this phenomenal as a vision.
And mangrove, for those of our viewers who don't know, are actually remarkable carbon capturing mechanisms.
Absolutely.
Now, COP28, since we're on the topic, led to the adoption of the so-called UAE Consensus, which contained unprecedented language around transitioning away from fossil fuels and energy systems. In the Western world, reactions to this announcement were mixed. From your perspective, how much of a breakthrough was it?
Amazing. So first is the first time that we focus on emissions, so the output. The second is the first time that we mention transitioning away from fossil fuel. It's a big thing. The third thing that I don't think that we realize in the Western world, and I say, I just moved there in the region a year ago, as you mentioned, it's what I discussed. I made an example of the growth rate that you have in the Middle East and the Global South. So today you have probably 80 to 90% of the population growth, of the energy growth, of the world that comes from these countries. So to be in the West, in the Global North, and to pledge, say, no, we need to reduce everything, fails to recognize the needs of the Global South that still needs to elevate. And we cannot do it today without gas-fired power plants. That's the first thing. The second thing is very interesting, because we say, all these, I'm saying it because I come from the Global North, so I take the privilege to say that, but we take all these pledges, we say we want to change the world. I say, fine, great. I go to all these companies and say, why don't you co-invest, or why don't you finance my projects in the Global South? No, we don't invest in non-OECD countries. So I think that there is a disconnect. And I think that we need to really start to change the perspective in the Global North, position ourselves. And I invite everybody to come and visit these countries and to be there for a while and think about how differently you think to find the solution that is pragmatic, realistic, and workable, not only to have a more sustainable economy, but also to elevate the quality of people in these countries, which will go a long way also to reduce the migrations that we see today and other problems that we're trying to solve.
Right now, there's been a discussion, in fact, over the last few years of the Global North subsidizing some of the transition in the Global South. And the amounts involved so far are relatively minuscule. Do you think that indeed the Global North countries should contribute more substantial amounts of money to help sponsor the transition?
I think that you don't need to subsidize in a way. You can simply invest.
Okay.
You can come and contribute to the growth. And I mentioned you can be on the equity, you can be on the debt. The other thing is there's 2 trillion philanthropy annually in the world. A lot of the projects that I see require concessional financing to lower the tariff for the local communities in the poorer countries.
Right.
A lot of things that I see is that it's a bit complex to channel all this money and focus it on the big infrastructure projects that will enable basically to have better living conditions. So those are all ideas, for banks, for equity investors, for philanthropy also, to be able to contribute to this. But there's another point that is developing today, and it's green hydrogen. You touched on it shortly before.
I want to ask you about it.
And it's interesting because it's kind of like where everything comes together. What is green hydrogen today? So basically you have renewable energy that feeds a plant where you will bring water, and through electrolyzers, you split the water in hydrogen and oxygen. So what skills do you need? You need the renewable power, you need the water. We have both. What do you need to make it? You need a lot of sun, you need a lot of wind, you need a lot of land, and the water, as I mentioned, in these countries, you can make all the water you want from desalination. So you have all these ingredients in all the region from, the GCC, the Gulf, MENA, North Africa, Middle East, and so on. I think that is a great way because at the end, the demand for this will largely be in the global north. Effectively, if you take an offtake from these projects in the global south, you're in one way decarbonizing the north, which is what we want, in the hard-to-abate sectors, like transportation, like fertilizers, like petrochemical. In the other, you're creating in these countries a scale that can be used to then deliver and develop additional water desalination, power generation, renewable. So it will be good also to decarbonize the global south.
Now, I wanted to ask you about this because you've already signed, I think, a 5 billion green hydrogen project in the context of NEOM. This is, I think, the largest project of its type.
Yes, so it is the first large scale project in the world, first and only today, fully dedicated to export. So we are going to invest, actually, if you include all the interest cost, and so the total project cost, 8.5 billion. Of that, 6.4 were project financed from a pool of 23 banks from around the world, from Asia, from the Gulf, from Europe, from the United States. We are going to invest with our partners, Air Products and NEOM. We're 3 partners on that project to build basically 1.2 million tons per year of green ammonia that can be then marketed into the final markets through ships. Today is the most convenient way to deliver that. Not only we are developing this, and today I think we have invested more than $2 billion already. So this will come in production at the end of 2026. It is real. If you go there, we have more than 8,000 people on site already working on this. Not only this, but it took us about 3 or a little more than 3 years to develop this from the concept to the groundbreaking. Today, we have put together this technical competence on reducing the cost from a technical perspective, all the contractual setup to project finance it. And what we saw is that this year, in 2023, last year, we were able in Uzbekistan to launch our second project where it took less than 1 year from the concept to the groundbreaking. So the ability to do things, to be the first one to do it, also make us the fastest developer in the world. And that's why every country is calling us to say, come and do it also here. What does scale give you? It gives us the ability to plan beyond the project. So what we have today, for instance, in Saudi Arabia and in Uzbekistan, 2 of the most advanced technology academies in the world for the workers on the plant. I give you the example of IWA, the Energy and Water Academy in Saudi Arabia. Every year we graduate about 800 people. We receive 150,000 applications for those 100 positions. It's more selective than Harvard. And we are now replicating it. We have replicated in Uzbekistan, a little smaller. It's about 200-300 people a year. But we are creating basically the ability for local people to elevate, train, and become the workers of the industry of tomorrow. I must admit, I am in love with Saudi Arabia. The level of people that you have in government and in the global champions of Saudi Arabia, Aramco, SABIC, ACWA Power, Ma'aden, is impressive. It's local, it's international. The governors and the ministers all educated at the highest universities, highest post from private sector in the past. So that's one big thing. The second thing is that today I noticed that in a world that is full of concerns and fear about the future, Saudi Arabia is fast becoming an island and a beacon of stability and hope. And I think that that is what today is bringing a lot of the international discussion, debate, and conferences to Saudi Arabia. Every month, there are delegations from all over the world. 50, 60 head of states I meet every month who come there from Central Asia, from Southeast Asia, from China, from Africa, and increasingly now from Europe. I see a big difference since I arrived 1 year ago. There's a perception that Saudi Arabia can play a stabilizing role, not only in the region, but I think throughout this world, where basically we can come and we can bring solutions through the companies that are headquartered there.
One last question before we move to a more organizational side. You mentioned exporting of green hydrogen. So I'm not an expert in this area, so I read a little bit, and the reports or the views seem to be mixed. There are some people who say that actually exporting green hydrogen is likely to, at least for now, be relatively inefficient, and you'd be better off using this green hydrogen, including to do things that require a lot of energy. Maybe steel even was mentioned. What's your view in terms of we'll use it locally versus we'll export?
So let me take a step back. Before moving to Saudi Arabia, I was very skeptical about green hydrogen and all the green molecules, because I see the projects in Europe, they tend to be smaller scale, difficult to scale up, and then become really competitive without subsidies. Then I moved to Saudi Arabia and I see the production cost there. And it's driven by the fact that the land is very abundant.
Yeah.
The water is, as I mentioned, very cheap. And the renewables, we have 3 times the sun that you have in Southern Europe, and more or less the same wind. And the cost of capital is relatively low because it's a high-grade, stable country. So what we see is really something that is the most competitive green hydrogen that you can produce in the world, net of subsidies. Then, of course, if you have IRA and all that, it changes, but I think that some of these will remain very local in terms of the consumption. So now the point is, as you say, do I export green hydrogen or what do I do with it? And we're studying that increasingly. I think the whole country is reflecting on that. Well, first, from NEOM Green Hydrogen Project, we're exporting ammonia, green ammonia, not green hydrogen. That is because today, the technology is there and it's simpler to export the ammonia. So we're targeting first the industries that will use ammonia directly, fertilizers, shipping, petrochemical, but you can crack it back to hydrogen. And that's what Air Products, for instance, is doing in the Netherlands. So they will be able to supply then the local industry. Increasingly then for the next phases, we're starting to say, but should we export the green ammonia or should we export the final product? Based on our calculations, to produce green steel in Saudi Arabia and export the green steel will be 20 to 25% cheaper than exporting the green ammonia or green hydrogen, produce the steel in Europe or Japan, and use it locally. So I think that we will see in the coming years more what the Saudi government is calling today green shoring. We have green energy that is the cheapest in the world. Come and produce here. By the way, centrally located along all the major shipping lines. So you can bring it to the Far East, you can bring it to Europe, you can use it locally for the developing economy of the Middle East and North Africa.
And of course, from a Saudi point of view, it's also a future economy post-oil.
Exactly. Part of Vision 2030 to diversify and have a bigger contribution of the private sector, also through FDIs. So there's a desire really to attract foreign investors rather than simply developing local champion.
Now, on the positive side of your job, you have this quasi-infinite growth potential and extraordinary tailwinds that you've been sharing with us. And of course, that's super exciting. And I guess many CEOs that are watching us right now are thinking, my God, this guy's job, this guy has the dream job. But of course, it's much easier said than done. What are some of the challenges that you're going to face managing, dealing with this enormous growth, and how are you preparing to overcome some of these challenges?
Yeah. It's a dream job. We dream while we are awake because we get very little sleep.
Right.
So that's the biggest problem. It's a work-life balance for the organization, and that's something we're working on. By the way, with an interesting twist, because we have a big office, of course, the headquarters in Riyadh. Weekends are Friday, Saturday. And we have a big office, historically was developed for international operation in Dubai. Weekends is Saturday and Sunday. So simply that is creating a lot of pressure on people basically to work all the time, which we cannot afford. So the big thing that we are trying to do now in this inflection point where we basically grow now to be 80 billion of assets under management. I call it asset under management because we do project financing, partners and all that. But at the end, we manage the totality of these. And we want to scale up and triple the size to $250 billion by 2030 in the next 7 years. So of course we are
in 7 years.
Yes. So we did 1 pair in 20 years. We want to do 3 pair in the next 7. So the acceleration is phenomenal. And so we're now at this inflection point where we need really to focus on strengthening the organization so that it can accelerate the growth, which means we need to develop and elevate the quality of our colleagues so that we can defer more of the decision making to lower levels and we can go faster. That is why we're scheduling and stepping up all the development programs. So besides this Energy and Water Academy for the workers at the plant level, we have a graduate development program, which is the next step for the people who are entering the job force. We have an EMO PGM acceleration project. The EMO is the CEO of the project company. So it's kind of, some of these project companies, they invest 3 billion, 2 billion. So it's like a normal company. It's a company, no? With partners, with project financing, building complex infrastructure, managing the off-takers and the supply. The PGM is the plant director, so the person responsible for operating the power plant. So it's an acceleration program of basically developing the people at that level who will take care of the actual producing assets. And on top of that, we have this strategic partnership now with IMD to basically look at the top level of the company and making sure that we can really develop an organization that is more structured, more stable, stronger to deliver the growth that we need to do. The other one, of course, so this is organizational internal. The other is more external, of course, in renewable energy. In a way, particularly PV, solar PV and wind, the barrier to entry are relatively low. So the competition is very high. So what we need to do is to continue to maintain this ingenuity, innovation, speed to always try to be one step ahead of everybody. So we created a specific focus on the strategic sourcing, both the EPC contractors, the suppliers, and an increased focus on the research and development and scouting for the new technologies, the new solutions that will allow us to remain competitive.
How challenging is it to remain disciplined in terms of this one we're going to do, that one we're not going to do? Is there a danger that we start running so fast that somehow we take on too many projects?
Yeah. Today we have a strategic focus, of course, with the big decarbonization program in Saudi Arabia. That will be about 60% of our growth. So that's a great anchor, relatively easy for us to manage because it's scaling up something that we know extremely well. And we are prepping up everything along the supply chain. So including logistics, including financing, everything is being planned these days really to make sure that we can scale it up. The second big bet that we're taking after Central Asia, as I mentioned, that will be kind of 15% or so of our total growth, is China. China will be the big focus in the next couple of years to scale up because I think that first, they also have big decarbonization programs. The scale there is massive. Yeah. We have a long-standing relationship because we have sourced more than 30 billion of contracts and supplies from Chinese contractors over the past few years.
Especially on the solar panel.
Also wind and contracting, the EPC contracting. Batteries, electrolyzers now for green hydrogen. We use both German, Chinese. That's an interesting thing. We are also about 25-30% of our annual spending is with European companies. So we really bring the best from all over the world and create the best solution. So going back to China, they also invested 10 billion in our projects historically. So it's now the time to continue to work with the same groups, which are state-owned enterprises, to enter China and contribute and participate in the decarbonization. And that, the three areas probably will be 90% or more of what we do. So that will allow us to remain very focused. We're not thinking today about entering the United States or Europe. Maybe in the future, we take one new challenge, one new opportunity at a time.
But even one at a time, there's still several at the same time in order to triple over 7 years. That's bewildering as a magnitude.
And actually, my biggest strategic dilemma today is Africa and Southeast Asia, because they tend to be more fragmented, slower in the development. And so how can I retain the scale? What should I do? Should I continue to play there or not? And I think the conclusion we're taking for now is, yes, we want to stay there because you don't know the next Uzbekistan could be Tanzania or Indonesia, where we can invest $10-15 billion. So you need to continue to have teams who are focused there to develop what could be the next stage. In that, we also work, of course, G2G, whenever we see the opportunity, basically, of a broader relationship to capture it, and sometimes also to participate and work with the host country, also given the relationships, to accelerate and bring the expertise that we saw elsewhere. But these two areas, the other thing that we're doing today is to consider acquisitions. So consolidation could be potentially a way to gain the scale that allows us to be more impactful and also look at developing even a smaller scale projects that are typical of some of these areas. So today, if we do a project in the Gulf, it's 1,000, 2,000 megawatt at a time. In some of these countries, 100, 200 megawatt. So to maintain the focus of the organization, you need to think also about a different business model and a different type of organization. That's why consolidation could help there.
Now, as you may know, I'm a professor of leadership. I have to ask you a few more personal questions. So the first one is, about 18 months ago, I guess, you get a phone call inviting you to enter the ACWA Power CEO succession process. How do you approach this process? How much due diligence do you do? How much do you ask yourself, do I really want this job?
So when they first approached me, my first reaction was, no, thank you. And the reason was that I had in my mind the old image of a closed country full of restraint, and I say, is there where I want to live personally? And I said, no, thank you. And they kept coming back. And at some point, I read Vision 2030. And I say, wow, this is a wonderful program. Visionary, very pragmatic, short-term targets spelled out across different parts of the economy, society. So I'm intrigued. Then they invited me to Riyadh for the final round of interviews. And really, I was blown away. At that point, I said, if ACWA Power doesn't take me, I want to still come here because this is a once-in-a-life opportunity to see change in society, culture, economy at such scale, such pace, with the people genuinely happy. Biggest surprise for me, going and moving to Saudi Arabia, how similar the Saudi are to Mediterranean people. Generous, hospitable, enjoy living. So it's great to be there at this time. So that is what drove me to say, okay, let's take a serious look at that. Then, of course, you do your due diligence. So you ask people who know, are familiar with the company, about the culture, about the integrity, about the financial results, about the opportunity. Am I going into something that needs to be restructured? Am I going into a growth opportunity? Of course. But the quality, the culture and the soft aspects are also very important because I believe in authenticity. And also, I always say, first when you get into a company as a leader, you need to understand the context, you need to set vision, priorities, targets, and then you see what your role in the organization is. You complement an organization. So it was really to take a look and see, can I contribute authentically? So can my style, my knowledge, my expertise be of help and be recognized inside and outside as bringing value. I think that that is the most important thing, because otherwise you will be disappointed if you need to be unauthentic, or if you see that the value you can bring is not as much as you were wishing for. So that is the biggest thing, and I found this alignment in this stage of the company, basically growing from a very successful large startup to needing to be more institutionalized without losing this element of agility, entrepreneurship, ingenuity that you had there.
You mentioned asking yourself, is my style going to adapt well, and will I create value? How would you describe your style? How would you describe yourself as a leader?
I think my North Star is that my job as a CEO is not more important than anybody else's job in the company. So, and I try to communicate that. I spent the first 6 months at ACWA Power, among different things, going to visit all our sites, all our countries, talk to the people. And what I told everybody, I'm not the CEO. I'm the CFO here, the Chief Facilitating Officer. I would like you to tell me what your problems are. 90% of the times, you also know what the solution is. What do you need from me and the organization to help you work better? I find that this also is helpful, first to get this direct chain of information, the informality, so that the biggest thing for a CEO is to be shielded from problems, that you see them too late. So it's really to break this and make it very informal and fast. But the other thing is to make sure that people then stop working in silos and they work together and stop thinking about the politics of the organization, but the common interest of the project or the company. So that's a little bit how I describe my style.
Let's assume, hypothetical situation, you and I were engineering students 30 years ago. And we were good buddies back then, but then somehow life separated us, and we met recently at an alumni event. What remains from the young Marco Arcelli, and what has changed?
I remain simple, and I grew grateful about everything I do. You know, I wake up in the morning as a CEO, you always have your mind busy with problems and challenges and things that you need to do. But at the end, we're privileged, we're lucky, and we're doing something that we love. You know, otherwise we would be doing something else. So this gratefulness is what really something that I had since the time of university, where I said, you know, I was so grateful with all the teachers I had, the teachers, the professors I had, the preparation that was given to me, and then the career developed, and that was really a lucky and fortunate series of events in a way. Although I had a great professor at Harvard who says, you know, the harder you practice, the luckier you get.
Yes.
So it's a combination. And the other thing that I'm interested in when I meet former colleagues, or, you know, particularly from the time of university, I remain a little bit romantic and lyrical, you know, inside myself. I'm interested in their path. You know, are you fulfilled today? Did you accomplish, or did you reach something that fulfilled your life? And life takes us in so many different directions that there is not a measure of saying, have you been successful? Successful is what you measure about your own fulfillment. So the story, the life story of each of my colleagues when we were in university always fascinates me, whatever they ended up doing.
But Marco, to become the CEO of ACWA Power doesn't happen just by chance or just by being a nice guy. I mean, there must have been some drive that you had to take on bigger jobs. You know, these jobs are demanding, and reasonable people would prefer not to have these jobs. So you must also have some drive. Did you always have this drive? Did you want to be influential? Did you want it to be a CEO when you were young?
Of course, yes. And so I think that every step you take, every decision you take tends to drive you in some direction. Then opportunities come or may not come. So I think you always need to be in a position where if nothing happens, you're still fulfilled.
Okay.
You know? But then the drive is there, the curiosity is there. taking the chance. I mean, sometimes people told me, why are you taking that position? I say, because it's a great opportunity, and I think I can do well with all the due diligence that we discussed. And if it doesn't go well, I'll still be happy that I tried. So I think that is what motivated me. Of course, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of grit. It's not always simple, and sometimes you wonder, you say, maybe it wouldn't be bad to be home in a simpler, more relaxing job, but I think at the end you follow your nature. And that is something that you need to always reflect is, what does your inner self, I don't want to sound too lyrical or too high, but what do you really want? And I think that when we say, you should not overthink decisions, but take them from the gut, is that your gut is really what drives you in your true yourself direction.
Being the CEO of an organization that is growing that fast, and you mentioned it earlier, is quite demanding from a quote-unquote work-life balance. How do you maintain yourself at peak performance? What are some of the rituals or practices that help you manage all this stress and remain at peak performance?
So I think the first one absolutely is that it is a passion. So I love my job. People say, you travel so much, you're a road warrior. I say, I love to travel. I love to meet new people. I love to go and talk to our people in the field and new cultures, counterparties, our customers, our suppliers. I love that, and that gives you energy. The second thing is, my ritual in the morning, I might surprise, but I start reading the gospel every morning. Not that I'm so religious. I believe, but it's in reality something that is kind of like almost meditation about something deeper. And I see now in the Gulf with people praying 5 times a day, I see how more balanced they are.
Grounded.
So, exactly. And I think that leads me to the gratefulness. So yes, it's hard, it's tiring, but I'm still privileged in everything that you do. Then more mundane, of course, you try to eat well, not exceed with drinking. So you need to take care of your body. And of course, the thing is the time. I would love to exercise more. I would love to go more to the gym or swim, or I love to hike and climb. Time is difficult. And so what I try to do is to really, when I carve out time, it's really carve out. So I don't answer the phone. I don't answer emails. It might be 1 day at a time. It might be 1 week at a time when I'm off. It might be 2 weeks during the summer. I think that's very important. And that's something that we're also trying to, in a fast-paced environment like ours, try to convey also to all our colleagues that yes, we're an adrenalinic company, but you need to set some boundaries because otherwise you cannot sustain it for the long run.
Marco, thank you for your time. Best wishes of continued success. And I look forward to staying in touch to see how you're progressing on this triple in 7 years. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.